Around about 1972, we were doing just normal border control in the Mount Marymount Mission area on the Mazoe River and surrounds, and that area was, as I say, it was very subverted. It was very difficult to find anything during the day. I actually felt that perhaps we should move more into night operations and sleep up rather during the day in the hot time and get into and recce the villages at night where all the haranguing was going on. I thought that that was probably a better thing to do, but we it was um, it was not part of being seen as one of our prime duties. Our prime duties was to, I suppose, we needed to show a presence more than anything else. So, but anyway, besides the point, it came, border control was boring at the best of times. You could go for days and days and patrol for days and days up and down. And being quite a populated area, always felt that there was eyes on you somehow or other. You felt that every move you make, you were reported. And it was actually impossible to cover that amount of ground with a small patrol of 4 or 5 guys doing sort of 3 patrols from your troop base every day. It was not very productive at all. And of course, we never all had trackers in our troops.
Yeah.
So if a lot of spoor, I'm sure we actually missed. So there were a few shortcomings that we did recognize. But sometimes in Rhodesia, we had to put up with a lot of things that we wanted, but were just impossible to get hold of.
Yeah, and of course that was prior to the Selous Scouts days. So
yes, exactly.
yeah, in a sense, the Selous Scouts was a solution to that problem, wasn't it?
Yes, I think the Selous Scouts and even the RLI became involved in reconnaissance of show camps, especially in the later 70s in Mozambique. I know that there was small teams of 4 out there looking for infiltration routes and whatever on the Mozambique side of the border with Rhodesia. So I think the RLI were quite capable of moving into a reconnaissance role. And I certainly, with my guys in 1972, were quite confident that we could have handled anything like that at night. I mean, we all were trained in superb camouflage techniques and things like that. So we weren't, we were wise to the bush. Because I just wanted to mention that before the Crocodile Attack, because many of us in the RLI were farm boys, and I think overwhelmingly farm boys.
Yeah.
And when we were brought up on the farm, compared with today's youngsters, I mean, it's like chalk and cheese.
Yeah.
I was driving a D6 bulldozer when I was 13 years old,
Yeah.
and having to plow at 2 o'clock in the morning with the African labourer standing at one end of the field with a lamp to steer you, so your contour, your plough lines were actually straight. So because then the planter had to come along and fit into those grooves, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there was an incident where I had one of the farmer lads sitting on the back controlling the hydraulics on the bulldozer, and we hit a bump, and the poor man fell off the back of the bulldozer and went under the plow. And a 6-disc plow is an ugly beast when you pushed under it, and the mush that came out at the other end, it was very tragic. But these are the things that you lived with on the farm. Sort of, I'm not saying a typical day, but the dangers and when you're having youngsters doing these things. It wasn't my fault at all. I mean, the police were called and whatever, but obviously you had to inform the police. But I learned very quickly from them all what I knew about bushcraft,
Yeah.
African customs, which were to set me in, and all the guys that used to do that, set you in good stead for the future.
Yeah.
Because it was a lot of the tour groups were actually surprised at the level. They thought a lot of the gangs thought that they were dealing with city boys. They didn't realize they were dealing with white Africans,
Yeah.
if I can call it that, and who were just as good. In fact, in many ways, much better, because they had a much broader outlook on the war situation than the average terrorist had.
Yeah.
Because and as when the war progressed, I started. You could feel the politicization on the farm, because when you have a cotton crop to pick, that's about 1,000 acres of cotton, because they built a cotton gin at Bandura. When you have got 1,000 acres, you need vast amount of labor, because it's all picked by hand, where you put your thumb and fingers around the bowl and you pull the cotton off. And it has to be done at a certain time, so the rain doesn't fall on it. Because if the rain falls on the cotton, it degrades it from A to C. And of course, that your profits start looking a bit miserable if you don't get it in. And we found that there was boycotts of labor, so we couldn't bring in the crop when we wanted to bring in. So we, like many farms, went into what they call it, judicial management, because of outstanding debt. Because we needed fertilizer every year. I mean, trainloads of it to service all our 24,000 acres, which I suppose most of it was hilly and whatever, which we used for cattle ranching. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that, because it saved a lot of guys' lives by having that sort of upbringing. Just to finalize that, one example of that was, we were sitting up in what we called our fourth farm, the MAD reserve in the hills, and we were building a dam up there with the bulldozer. And at night we were sleeping out, and of course all the young, they were actually my friends, were all sitting around the campfire, and it happened to be very, very cold. And they said to me, "Oh, don't worry," because we didn't have blankets and tents and things like that. We would just had our shorts and t-shirts type thing, and maybe one blanket. So they taught me to make a little shell scrape, probably about 2 foot wide and about 4 foot long, and dig a hole about 6 inches deep. And then we sat around the fire, and when the coals got the logs got down to coals, we shoveled those into the pit, this little pit, and you shoveled the soil back on top of it, and you lay on top of the soil with the blanket over you. And that's an example about a city dweller would never have even thought about that.
Yeah.
And I don't think half the army even considered that. Probably because we didn't waltz around the bush with entrenching tools.
Yeah.
Fundamentally. So if you were digging a hole, it was with a pang or with a stick or with your hands or something like that. But it was just things like that. And I learned about the depot vine and how to get water. I used to carry black plastic bags with me everywhere I went in my patrol days, because if you carry the garbage bags, at least 2 of them, you can get inside it and it wards off the cold at night. And things like that. And you can use it to generate water from the soil. By digging a hole, putting a mug underneath with a bit of plastic over the top with a stone in it, so all the drips from the soil drip into the mug. You probably only get half a cup a night, but normally that's enough to stop the thick tongue and the swollen throat. Depot vine, few and far between, but at least you know where to find it and how to tap the vine to get water out of it. Mostly bitter. We did that. They showed me how to do that. They found these things. And then, of course, there was the go-away bird. a famous century for everybody, and
Yeah.
everybody used it because
Grey
it didn't.
Lowry. Mm.
Yeah, the Grey Lowry. It didn't distinguish between any race, color, or creed.
Yeah.
It was movement, and especially with human movement, it had that go away call, call, and you knew there was people in that, something moving in that area.
Yeah.
And the possibility that it was human was 50-50, I suppose. And I also learned about the honey guide and following the honey guide and making sure that you leave a bit of the honeycomb that you've robbed the hive of. You put leave it on a rock, and preferably one that has the grubs in it, because the honey guide is not after the honey; it's after the grubs, the bees that are in the mix, in the honey. And the saying goes that if you don't leave it, the next time the honey guy is going to lead you to a leopard's lair. So these are the things that I held dear, and I followed the routines all the time. I didn't break them because whether it was believable or not is not the point. The point is to satisfy the honey guide so it continues on with its good job, you know. So things like that. Anyway, I just wanted to digress because all these things made it possible to survive in the bush.
Yeah.
And the people that served under me didn't have too much problem with falling in for water, airdrops of water, especially in Mozambique and whatever. Because we found or made our own in many ways. And those sort of bushcraft things warned you off where to camp, where not to camp, and things like that.
Yeah.
Although you carry out military tactics, there's bush tactics that you need to apply as well.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to mention that to you because I think I saved myself, my own life, but I think I was also managed to save lives, because one of the jobs of a leader is not to blindly go in and shooting where the fools fear to tread.
Yeah.
You know, my job was preservation of my men first and foremost.
Yeah.
So I would rather steer away from combat if I was not equipped or had the inclination that I was going to win.
Yeah.
But because Rhodesians had a will to fight and whatever, their aggression alone must have scared the living crap out of because we always believed, and it came to pass, that if you didn't get killed in the first rush of fire from an ambush, once their magazine had gone, all you had to do is jump up and run at them, because 9 times out of 10 they were fumbling around trying to fit a new magazine to them, or reload the SKS, or put another magazine into the AK, because they were fumbling around. Because you can imagine these apparitions in shorts, t-shirts, and tackies and veldskoen. And for those uninitiated, veldskoen is translated from Afrikaans. Veld is bush, and skoen is a shoe. So a lot of guys, I used to wear veldskoen with no socks, because all the burr weeds would attach themselves to your socks and make your legs and feet most uncomfortable. Anyway, so that was the major tactic, and because of the aggression was the success. We never really got in any firefight. We never got bogged down, and there was no such belief in going backwards. It was all about static or going forward. You know, obviously sometimes with support of fixed wing, but just the aggression of the young Rhodesian, because we're all boys. We were hardly men, and just that sheer aggression. As the war carried on, we became more aggressive and more keen to find these guys. So the war became more frustrating because we couldn't. So I was particularly pleased when it was decided that we were going to do external operations and put them at their sanctuaries in neighboring countries, because that was a sensible thing to do. And basically, that's where we really had the upper hand, because basically all of them were just extended fire force attacks on the camp. At and obviously a higher level, using a lot more transport into the battle, because that's the secret of insurgent operations, to get people to the scene of the presence of the terrorists as quickly as possible before they get an inkling that they have been found. You know, sleeping next to helicopters and under deck wings and things like that was order of the day for those that are on Fire Force, which the RLI were great proponents of. I mean, it was Dave Parker's thing. So that's just a bit on the tactics side that I thought I'd mention from my point of view, and that was my take on it. And that's how I felt the war. Anyway, to get on to the Crocodile Attack, as I say, we were based near Marymount Mission, but I was getting bored because I wanted to get to these guys. I wanted to find them. I wanted to eliminate them. That was my prime objective, and I wasn't having much success. There was a lot more other guys in RLI that had more contacts than I did, and I couldn't understand why I wasn't getting it. Either they were more scared of me than I was of them, or maybe I was doing something wrong. But I tried everything. I did a senior attack course at the School of Infantry, and I spoke to the guys there, or Pat Hill, Major Hill, who was the OC attack wing, on what the hell was I doing wrong? Because it always seemed so. I thought, right, if I can't do my night thing, because I believe that we should have actually got more night fighting equipment like scopes, and we should have had more sniper sort of operations, and put in much smaller groups, 2-man groups, overlooking villages, which were taken on very late in the war, but they could have been done. Those sort of tactics were recommended by my likes of me in 1972, 71, 72. It was nothing new. It was just when they were going to get around to getting it.
Yeah.
Because I only used a night scope once. So happened to be in Mozambique, and a Frelimo guy walked into our ambush, and we shot him. You know, you never know really who shot who, because everybody opens fire, and we dumped the body on a hill. Where a big scream came from the Council of Churches, where they said that we were decimating bodies. But what had happened was we dumped the body on the promise that the Air Force would pick it up later, because they just didn't have a way to pick up the body. So we dumped it on a hill. And of course, I think maybe they forgot about it, but the hyenas pulled this body to pieces. And the mission, obviously the locals found it, took it to the mission station, and they automatically turned it into a Rhodesian atrocity, forces atrocity. So it's things like that we had to put up, and it was very demoralizing on many occasions. Anyway, so getting back to the attack again, we have actually, I thought, well, you know, we had been through Op Sable, where big camps were found north of the Mazoe River. And it dawned on me and many others, I'm not say I'm the originator, but riverline patrols were very important, because they had to get water like we had to. And they also wanted to get to water quickly, and they needed lots of it, because the heat in that area, as you know, is horrendous. I mean, you fought in between 38 and 44 degrees in summer. So midday was just impossible. You know, it's mad dogs and Englishmen that go out in the midday sun, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, but so I thought, well, maybe there's a chance that we can catch them either at the river, filling up bottles and whatever to take back to the camp. Because if they were clever, they wouldn't camp on the river. They would camp some distance away from the river, because it was an obviously highway for a navigation point for the locals and security forces. So the likelihood of them being found, their camp being found, would have been greater if they had done that. Anyway, we decided that I was going to do a patrol, and I was talking about Op Birch, where we actually liberated this Russian dinghy, and we had it in our troop trailer. I thought about this, and I said, maybe let's do a river patrol. The first One Commando Navy was born, because I had John Dixon, who was one of my corporals, who became an officer and the adjutant of RLI. So, I had some brilliant junior NCOs, and John and I thought, I picked John and I said, let's do this. So we decided to go down using the flow of the water because the Mazoe River was running quite well. Normally it's a bit dead. It's a perennial river. It's always running, but it was running, I would say, half, 3/4 full. So we had a nice current to take us downriver from Marymount Mission down towards, and we were going to get off at the Mazoe River Bridge.
Yeah, so one Commando Navy was born, and you went down the Mazoe River. Did you spot any of the enemy?
No, but we did bypass locals, and we were watching out for. Obviously, they were picking up water. Later on, we found from the game department that I reported the incident to. They said that quite a few locals had been taken by crocodiles in the Mazoe River because of coming down and fetching water and not taking the necessary precautions and whatever. So I was wary of the crocodile threat, and especially when the water holes are dry. The crocodiles actually, they walk across land, and they have no problem walking from one river to another across land. But these guys had plenty of water to drink, so they were all at the river rather than at the waterhole, because the waterhole was an easy feeding ground, because all the other antelope and that came down to drink at the waterhole. Anyway, so it was under those sort of condition. It was very hot and whatever, and the dinghy was only a 2-man dinghy anyway. So we had a paddle, and we also had a patch repair kit, which is always very handy when you're in an inflatable rubber dinghy. And it had the bottom part was like an inner blow-up mattress type thing, which added to the buoyancy of it. So we decided that we would go kitted in denims and more substantial military kit, proper boots, proper denims, and whatever. Not only because of the water and to help keep the sun off. But we only took our FN rifles with us, and we strapped those through a roping system that would give us freedom movement of the rifle whilst in the dinghy. And we also strapped jerry cans to it for drinking water and so on. So we had quite an elaborate setup and a radio that we had attached to it, because to lose any military equipment was actually worse than committing a behavioral offense. To lose a bloody A60 radio or something like that was a serious business. Yeah. So we had to make sure sensibly that we did it. I got permission to do it from the OC of the troop, the Commando, because once again, the troop commander was on playing rugby. Anyway, so we set off about 6:30 in the morning, because we had it was possibly about 20-kilometer trip. And we tried to estimate speed and whatever. And we said, well, it would take us best part of a day, especially if we wanted to stop off on the bank or an island and check it out. So we set the whole day, and I set up transport to pick us up at the Mazoe River Bridge later on at the end of the day. I don't remember what time it was, but it was all properly timed and whatever. And the route was established, so everybody knew where we were. We got into the dinghy, and everything went well. And the Mazoe River, you have big pools of water where it's slower, but then you have rapid areas, which were easy to, because the river was flowing reasonably well. And you also had these avenues of reeds that had paths for the water to go through. So you sort of fitted between these two high banks of reeds. And we'd have young crocodiles jumping in the water behind us and in front of us. at different sizes or whatever. And I said, jeepers, this place is infested with crocodiles. And I said to John, I remember saying, we must keep our eye out here because, this is getting a bit hairy. I think we were more afraid, if you want to call it that, of the crocodiles, anxious, put it that way, of crocodiles, and we were the. And then on the eventful location, we burst out of these reeds into a huge pool. It must have been about 200 meters wide for the Mazoe. That's big, but it didn't look too deep, and it had a few islands, sand islands around. So which had appeared because the river wasn't full, but it was, half empty or half full, whatever you like to call it. Anyway, when we burst out of there, we were going fine. And I was steering at the back, and John was facing me in the front of the dinghy. So he was going backwards. I was going forward. And all of a sudden, I looked to the left. Something attracted my attention to the left-hand side, the north bank of the Mazoe River. And this huge, we said the one that got away is always the biggest, all right? But this bloody crocodile was monstrous. And it had a target, and that was us. There was no doubt about it in my mind. It bailed off that bank in a huge bloody splash of water and motored like a flippin' motor launch towards us. There was no slow swimming, so to speak. This thing was on a mission. Anyway, so it eventually arrived at the dinghy. There's nothing we could do about it. We couldn't maneuver. We didn't have the resources to move out of the way. We didn't have an engine or anything, so we were stuck. And this thing came and opened its mouth, not too wide, but opened its mouth enough to close it between my knees and John Dixon's knees. Fortunately, not on our bodies. And the air started leaving the dinghy with this bloody crocodile. Its eye must have been about 2 feet from my eye. And I was staring at this thing in horror. And it had green algae on it. It was whatever. And it had fallen so much that it had jammed up our roping system to our weapons. So our weapons got a bit tangled up and whatever. Anyway, the croc itself must have put it this way, bitten off more than it could chew, because it didn't know what to do with this thing, because it didn't taste like flesh. So I fell off the back because the dinghy had deflated. I fell off the back of the dinghy, and John stayed on the front of the dinghy. And of course, it bent up like this. So he had buoyancy from the inner. That's why I explained to you it had an inner. And off he went down with the flow of the current. I was standing on sandy water with the water right up to my neck. And I was looking around for this bloody crocodile because I thought, jeepers, that's where the danger is. So I managed to, when I fell off, I managed to slip my rifle off. But when I slipped my rifle off, instead of going onto my shoulder, it dropped to the bottom, the river, fell into the river and disappeared. And I thought, well, now I'm in a pickle now because I've lost equipment. But where's this crocodile? And it was when John was about 20 meters away from me, about 10 meters away from me, I think it was. This crocodile surfaced between me and the bloody John Dixon. And John Dixon had managed to relieve his rifle so he could fire it, but he couldn't fire it because I was on the other side of the crocodile. So the crocodile disappeared underwater. I said, well, bugger it. If I stay here, I'm doomed anyway. So I just lashed out and swam and half ran because I could get my feet onto the ground to the protection of the dinghy. At that stage, the dinghy had bashed up against a rock in the river, which was enough for both of us to sit on. So we sat on this thing with the dinghy wrapped around the rock, and this bloody croc surfaced about 3-4 meters away from us, where it had gone down. So John, I said, shoot the bastard. So John fired at this crocodile, and you could see he was hitting it, but you could see all the scales on its back were bouncing off. And I thought, Jesus, are the bullets sinking in, or were they just bouncing off this bloody thing? Anyway, it disappeared again. But then we looked out to our left onto the south bank, and we saw a bit of an island, but it was only about 15 meters away. So we jumped off a rock and found that we could walk to the island. So we dragged the dinghy to the island, and we fixed the puncture with the puncture repair kit, thank goodness. After a while, we left it for about an hour to dry, the glue to dry, because you actually had to glue it, the patch, the rubber patch on all the holes, which we just managed to do. And then we had to inflate, so we had to blow it up with our mouths because we didn't take the pump with us. Anyway, so we got this thing to some sort of ship shape and said, all right, well, we're going to cancel the patrol now, and we're going to go to the north bank using the dinghy rather than walk with the dinghy all the way down to the bridge. We were going to just go to the north bank and then call transport into the nearest road, and cancel the patrol. So we set off across this big pond, and went to the north bank. And the north bank was very steep. And so we started clambering up the bank. And guess what? I got this funny, creepy feeling, looked behind me, and there was the bloody croc. It was probably about 10 meters out, but I think it was a little bit cautious because it didn't know what it was getting itself into now. But it wasn't dead. That was for sure. But we got up to the bank with no further incident, and we arrived, we got into our transport and went home. And you think anybody believes that story? Only John and Dixon and I do.
Did you get into trouble for losing your rifle, or did you recover your rifle?
They definitely, it was equipment, so they had a board of inquiry. But it was amazing that about 2 years later, a TF patrol had gone along that neck of the woods, and there was this rifle barrel sticking out of the sand. And they pulled it out, and it was butt number 45, which was mine. And it was sent back to the armory. So we retrieved the rifle, but I don't think the armorers allowed it to be used ever again. But it had my serial number on it and whatever. So
it's funny. It's funny, Deryck. I just mentioned this. The last RLI gathering I went to before I came out here to the Philippines, I had lunch with John Dixon. He's living in Hermanus down in the Cape. And he's in good health and still looks young, and so I wish I'd known about this story. I would have asked him all about it and got him to tell me the story.
Yeah, I think John's career was taking off, and he didn't want to do anything to blight it. So we basically saw that the army wasn't going to have a board of inquiry, but they had a board of inquiry, but it was inconclusive. But they had to can it when they found the rifle because it was actually in the same location as where I reported the incident. Yeah. So they said, well, how did the rifle get there? And it could only got there by me. So it then just disappeared.
Yeah.
And the whole thing. And I tell the story, but I think a lot of people are dubious about it, but I can tell you those are facts, and that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. If everyone is filled with adrenaline, I was filled then for about 2 hours. I was just operating like an efficient fighting machine because I wasn't going to allow this thing to get the better of me. But I can imagine how guys in deep combat for a long time actually feel when you're full of adrenaline, because our training in the RLI, just like other great units, the efficiency and the readiness of the guys to fight is based on training. There's no doubt about it. Because it's amazing how it all floods back automatically. So, and that's what drill is supposed to do for you, which I hated to the end of this earth.
Yeah. Well, before you go on to your next point, you've just triggered a childhood memory. Yeah, it's so true. I mean, us young Rhodesians, we had bushcraft skills, from just, I can remember when I was about 14 and I was at Plumtree School, at the time. Oh no, I was at Peterhouse at the time, and then I left Peterhouse and went to Plumtree because I'd met the Tiffin family and William Tiffin, Bill Tiffin, who I became very good friends with. They lived on a farm on the Msweswe River, and it was a huge wild farm. And the Msweswe River was a bit like the Mazoe River. It was full of crocodiles, and a lot of the locals had been taken by crocodiles. And the district commissioner gave us permission to shoot the crocodiles, but we weren't allowed to keep the skins because crocodiles were so-called royal game. And once a month, the district commissioner would come there and collect the skins and take them with him. But as teenage kids, we used to get onto this little rickety boat. There were three of us. One would do the rowing, and one would hold the torch and bail water out because this thing was leaking, and then one would be shooting. And because I was the guest, I was normally the one who was allowed to shoot. And I had this little 6.5 millimeter Mauser. And we used to go out in the dark of night, and some of these were bloody big Nile crocodiles. We're talking, much longer than the boat we were in anyway. And when you shoot that thing and you hit it, all hell breaks loose. Man, we had these kind of adventures as teenagers, which nowadays a city boy growing up in London or something has absolutely no idea, about. No. And we used to hunt baboons as well, because baboons were vermin, and the district commissioner used to pay us 2 shillings and sixpence for each baboon tail.
Yeah.
And and I can remember
those days.
Yeah, I can remember wounding a baboon on a cliff face on the Msweswe River, and he fell into the water, and you just saw all these crocs coming and attacking this wounded baboon. It was quite something to watch. And we had these dogs that were sort of like Jock of the Bushveld type of terriers, but they loved baboon hunting. Yeah. And some of them had been in serious fights with
Ridgebacks.
Rhodesian Ridgebacks, yeah.
Okay.
And there was this one Ridgeback. He'd been so badly wounded by this baboon, it had bitten him on his back. The puncture wound went right through, and there was like frothy blood coming out of this puncture wound from his lung. But he survived. And I tell you, every time he saw us take down the rifle and getting ready to go hunt baboons, these dogs would go crazy. They loved it,
Yeah.
And and they were so brave, unbelievable. Because a baboon can kill a leopard. So I mean,
yeah.
But you brought back some childhood memories of.
I didn't mention it, but on the farm we had regular what we called the Baboon Shoot, because the baboons would go up into the hills and sleep in the trees, and now again a leopard would climb the tree and get itself some lunch at night. But in the morning they'd get up. The whole troop of baboons would get up and come down to the lads and pinch all your bloody mealies off the stalk.
Yeah, that's right.
So what we used to do, all the farmers used to get together. We used to have a military operation type thing against the baboon camp. So early in the morning, when it was still dark, we went up the re-entrant and we surrounded this camp. Everybody obviously pointing their shotguns or whatever they had downwards. So in the early light, when they started moving, we just let fly. And you'd, sort of wipe out a whole troop of baboons, because if you didn't do it, but it's amazing, 3 or 4 days later, they were replaced by another bloody troop of baboons.
Yeah.
So there was, they were major vermin, a major pest. And likewise, the district commission, I think, ran out of petty cash eventually. Anyway, that was my crocodile trip. And I had, like all of us, it would be too long to mention all my encounters and other people's encounters with the indigenous wild animals of Rhodesia.
Yeah.
Elephants and buffalo and rhino and crocodiles and lions and everything like that. Rhinoceros. We all had bloody hyenas. Yeah. I just to finish that off about relationships and the interaction between the farmers and their labor force. We were camped out in the Umfuridzi area when I was still at school, building cattle fences near the Mazoe River, right in the middle of the new hurricane area. And we used to sit at night under a canvas lean-to, and all the black guys would sit there, the farm workers would sit there with a fire, and they would tell stories to us. And we had a tractor driver called Machipa who spoke very good English. So he'd translate this. And every 2 minutes, they were in fits of laughter from what they thought was very funny, like taking out 12 dogs who cornered a leopard in a tree. The leopard was up the tree, and they kept barking at it. Eventually, the leopard got hurt, climbed down the tree and killed all 12 dogs. They thought this was hilarious. And they had a hyena going into one of their kraals and taking out a skin that was dry, it must have been about 50 years old, and ate it. They thought this was hilarious. So hyenas and leopards and that is very close to their jokes about what happened. We listened to it every night, and it was so entertaining. And I learned a hell of a lot of, how they actually think and what makes them tick. Anyway, and we also had this thing with the light in the bush. The lights that just run around, and they believe are the spirits of ancestors. Meanwhile, I buggered up their whole mythology because I said, this is marsh gas. It collects and then it's phosphorus. So as soon as it meets the air, it pops in the air. And if you've got a wind blowing, it blows it while it's popped. So it gives it the appearance that it's actually moving through the bush. And of course, exaggeration says that this stuff charges you. You must watch it. You mustn't look at it. So anyway, those were the myths and whatever that I learned. So yeah, basically that is it. And that was my early fighting days in one commando. It's then that my time for being promoted, and I think they believed I was a little bit bush happy at that stage. So when after a sergeant, I was due for promotion to colour sergeant, and I got promoted to colour sergeant, and at the same time shipped off out of the troop. And it was amazing that in the last night, Louis Thackeray, who was a sergeant in 3 Troop, and he was posted to the School of Infantry, and I was posted to Depot RR. If you remember my confrontation with Tiny Clemo, here we go. Anyway, and Louis and I were sitting in the WS and sergeant's mess at Mount Darwin, and we got thoroughly pissed because the next day we were to leave our beloved Commando and off we go to training. Other people. I thought it was a good idea. I thought, well, it's part of your career, because we still believe we had careers at that stage. So this was part of your career. You had to go away, use all your experience to train the national servicemen to take on and be more efficient at what they did. So, it was an honorable cause. So it didn't bug us. But leaving the battalion was something that we didn't want to do, really. And we got thoroughly pissed. And Everesto, who was the sergeant's mess barman, was trying to tell us to stop, but we were drinking bottles of vodka, and we let down the whole tent, and it collapsed the whole bar. And Harry Springer came in there, and he looked at this whole lot, and he said, "I'll see you two tomorrow morning." Okay. So when we got up the next morning, we marched into his table in the mess that had been reconstructed. And he said, there was nobody else there. And he said, and he gave us a flippin' rocket, boy, like you've never seen. I didn't believe Harry Springer could shout at me like that, boy. We got a rocket for that. But he never took any action. He said, because he said, I understand, that but you guys must learn to control yourselves a little bit better than that. You're getting higher up in the ranks, and this isn't type of behavior is not tolerated in the WOs and sergeants mess and whatever. And I said, I know, because we had always had that thing that what happens in the mess stays in the mess, even during right from early days in RLI. So if you got into a bit of an argument, a fight where you got too drunk or whatever in the mess. Next day, nobody would know about it because nobody would talk about it. And it was said, as long as you do that, the RSM was a lot easier on you when he bollocked you for doing it, because you didn't spread it amongst the battalion because it was seen as not very good for morale, or it didn't show the discipline that perhaps we should have exercised. So that was life. And anyway, I went by train to Heaney Junction and joined A Company with guys like Stan Hornby. The RSM was Jock Hutton, I think, at that stage. And I had guys like George Moffat, Pete van der Riet, Rob Korb. I was made, because I was a colour sergeant, I became the platoon commander, because you became a commander, and these sort of, you started off with about 60 to 100 guys in your platoon, and you had to do all your basics with these guys right up front. Pete van der Riet was the other platoon commander. John Delarue was the CQMS in A Company DRR. So we were all, I didn't feel so bad then because I thought maybe I'd been punished in some way because I didn't have all these contacts. I had a few, but not as many as some of those that the guys had. So I felt quite relieved because, and then I quite enjoyed it. It wasn't a case of having power, but what I enjoyed was the tremendous leveling process that National Service did. I mean, not to be crude, but I was offered a lady's bed if I looked after her young little Johnny in the army, and I favoured him so he wouldn't get into too much stress and strain, and he wasn't treated too badly. I even got offers like that. A lot of guys got this most strangest request about little Johnny, and some guys actually thought that they should have been the army commander. But they were all brought down to size after a couple of weeks. Don't worry, we made sure that, and a lot of them became lifelong friends. So the social class divide was broken down at DRR. I can assure you of that. And I thought that was a wonderful thing. And that's why the army was so successful, because nobody thought they were better than anybody else. Yeah. Always treated everybody as equals. Yeah. And that was a very, very good thing. But at least I knew the national servicemen would go off and fight as a cohesive unit. Because after a while, all the applicable guys were hived off to the School of Infantry to do NCO training, because we took NCOs from those ranks I was talking about, those 60 guys and their officers. So they were selected and they either became officers and NCOs and returned sort of 9 months later to take over their troops that were now had completed all their training and were ready to go to an independent company. There was a big question at the end of that. I did one intake, complete intake, my first one. The platoon itself were a bit concerned, and they went to the OC of A Company. I have his name on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, they went to him and they said to him, why can't I, the platoon commander, go with them to the independent company, at least for 3 to 6 months, to make sure that they were properly led and managed, because they said, how can they become superior officers and NCOs when they've just done the same time as we have in training? What have they done that we couldn't have done? So it was a bit of a thing. I think it was a lack of trust. And I think the military could have done a lot more to introduce these guys a lot quicker, or to delay their border control duties fundamentally before their thing. And I thought it was probably a good idea that we should probably go with them for a month, but just as advisors, because we would have been good advisors to the young officers, subbies, because as you know, in the RLI, a subby never took over his troop until he had done at least a year. The troop sergeant was still the boss. He would, if he was wise, he would consult his troop sergeant before he made any decisions, just to check off that It was in line with the RLI sort of ethos and the RLI way of doing things, which was a very good thing. So handover takeover like that to me was important. Anyway, starting off my second squad or my next platoon for the next intake, I was asked to be designated to go and collect the guys at Eni Junction with my red sash on. So I was given that authority. And I went up there with the trucks. The train duly arrived. All these guys bailed off the train. I stood there and I said, "Get in the back of the trucks, follow the dust." Exactly what Tiny Clever, I said, because at that day when Tiny Clever, remember I said, I'm going to, in my own mind, I'm going to get this done. And it's going to, and that was a great day in my life. Because we stood there, and I think even the RSM said, "Where's all the guys?" I said, "They're on their way." But we were never questioned on things like that from senior management or whatever. They trusted you to treat these people lower than shark shit, but in the back of your mind, you love them to death. You know what I mean? But it was a necessity that you had to stamp your authority and the military way of doing things. To expect the unexpected and things like that. So you could never know in the war situation whether you were actually, you could well be on one operation and automatically switch to another. Within seconds, you could be transferred by helicopter one day, and the next day you'd have to walk from a couple hundred kilometers to come home. So, you know, that was the way of life. And that's why I think regular instructors, especially from the RLI, were very valuable trainers at the depot. After I'd finished there, I was transferred halfway through my second phase to become a PSI, a permanent staff instructor as a colour sergeant to the drill hall in Salisbury from the 1st Battalion. And I was PSI of C Company. Gene Franks from the SAS, who was also a colour sergeant, he was the PSI for, I think it was A Company. But each company had a PSI who was a regular soldier. It was probably those people, how Stan Hornby, because he'd done nothing wrong, and I had done nothing wrong to deserve a post like that. But I actually thoroughly enjoyed it because now you were dealing with relatively seasoned troops. So they had a firm understanding what the war was all about. So you didn't have to worry about the basics. What we were concerned about enhancing skills, like shooting skills with the old the jungle lane and the mainly marksmanship and conservation of ammunition. You know, we tried to teach them the good old RLI double tap and to how to control your weapons a lot better, how to look after your weapons a lot better. We taught them because we'd all done senior attack courses at the School of Infantry. We were in with the officers, teaching them how to brief instead of going through all those full briefings with all these models on the ground with maps and whatever. I said, because if you ever get into an operation, that there's always some higher authority, probably from SAS or RLI or Scout, it wasn't the Scouts, yeah, the Scouts were around then. Their commanders would probably give you the briefing. It wouldn't be your own commander as such. Yeah. But your platoon still needs to go through the proper briefing structure to make sure, and we just made sure that the platoon commanders and whatever did actually brief their guys and debrief. And I've already said to you, in my days as a sergeant in Mozambique, there was very little of that. And there were still no rules of engagement. I believe that unless anybody knows better than I do, that I never received one rule of engagement. It was up to you how you fought that war. The thing about our war, which was a lot different to a lot of other guerrilla warfare worldwide, and that is that the stick, the helicopter stick of 4, became the smallest unit, and the lance corporal of the troop had the same powers and same leadership had to have the same leadership qualities as the troop commander, who was a lieutenant or a second lieutenant, because they had to make instant decisions on the ground because there was nobody else there. It was only as they grew bigger and bigger, if there was two sticks combined, the sergeant would probably take over with his stick, or a senior corporal would take over two sticks. But then it would become get to the troop level where the troop commander would be the leader. But the sticks always got dropped off as 4 members of stock groups. So if you had an assault on a Turk camp or a position, it was either 4 men, 8 men, 12 men. The assault team, up to 16 men, which was the para stick. So it depended on the size of the camp, was the size of the unit you put in there. But fundamentally, a lance corporal had the same powers as the troop commander.
Right.
And I think it could have only been done like that because the amount of ground that these guys had to cover, it was phenomenal. And that's why it was more and more, I keep saying it, I know, but it was more and more important that we get to their sanctuaries because we weren't finding them. And let's face it, from 71 onwards, the Turs started winning the hearts and minds of the people. There was no doubt about it, whether it was through intimidation or whether it was through true belief and whatever. But they had control of larger and larger and larger areas of Rhodesia. And even later on, when you hear that guy, the Battle of Harungwe, for instance, in that area, how subverted that area. That Deryck Watt and those guys were looking for the Strela gang and whatever in that area. How subverted they are because they couldn't tell the difference between a local gang and the actual Strela gang. And there's a lot of doubts on whether Daryl had a contact with the Strela gang or not, but I don't think. I think even Daryl said he doesn't think so because intelligence said it was just a local gang. So perhaps the Strela guys actually got away with their atrocious behavior in shooting down those 2 Viscounts. So it was a very difficult situation for 4 men, and always everybody was kitted out the same. You had the boss who normally carried the radio, the lance corporal or corporal, and then you normally have some guy who is trained as a sort of rudimentary medic, and you'd have a rifleman, and you would have a machine gunner, and all the guys carried belts with the machine gun or whatever, and guys carried from 4 magazines to 8 magazines, depending on how long or what sort of fight you were going into. So they were all based on the same. So you could rely on, if you had 8 men, you'd have 2 machine guns, for instance. So, as the enemy got bigger, started moving in bigger and bigger groups, so the fire force had to grow bigger and bigger and bigger. And of course, when you attacked external operations, it was really just a massive fire force operation. Typically, the Air Force would come in and bomb the daylights out of the camp. Hopefully, they're all on parade and what. But you still had to, in military terms, you still got to take the ground. You can't say you have a victory until you occupy the ground that you're attacking. So you have to assault the people that were trying to run away, run into your stock groups and whatever. So, it's just a total encirclement thing that we used to do on the farm with the baboons. It was very little difference.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just had to mention that. Anyway, as a PSI, I quite enjoyed it. The one thing about it, it was like having a civilian job. It was sort of 8 to 5 job. And now and again, we would go out near Mazoe on some farmer's farm and do a jungle lane or whatever. But other than that, and do a few ambushes and debussing drills and all that type of thing. So when I finished off, before I finished off there, I had constant visits from Neil Creel, who happened to be my troop commander. I think there were 2 or 3 visits from him at the drill hall. He used to pop in and sit down, and we used to have a cup of tea and whatever, because there was very little people around the drill hall during the day. It's only when they got called up when things started to move. But there was very few people there, so we were able to have a chat. And he was always trying to persuade me. He said, "When are you coming to the Sulu Scouts?" And he wanted me to join his recce troop. So he really kept badgering me over a period of about 9 months. The nice thing about it is because all my sort of vintage guys that were in RLI that I had trained with and grew up as a young NCO with were actually in the recce in the Sulu Scouts. So guys like a Willie Devine and that who was played with me in the first team water polo at school. So even my school chums were there. So it would have been an ideal second home for me. But on the think about round about the 3rd occasion, somewhere in that lot, I was called to Army headquarters to ask what my future plans were. Because in a year's time, or a couple of years' time, my 10 years service and 123 days was up, and I needed to decide which way I wanted to go. There wasn't too much pressure. I think I was only interviewed once about that. Anyway, it came about that it was now time. I had been as a PSI at depot, at the drill hall, sorry, in Salisbury. And it so coincided with my Colour Sergeant to WO2, Gene Franks, was on the WO2's course with me. And he was also a PSI. Whether that was coincidence to get us to Salisbury, so we were close, because all our lectures and that were done at RLI in Cranbourne. And I know Charlie Krause was on the same course as me, and Stan, and basically all my same vintage. So we all knew each other anyway. And one of the biggies was tribal customs and things. So when I said that my farm upbringing made African customs and bushcraft a breeze for most of us on the course. It was nothing new, like how to approach a kraal and how to do this and that and the other, and respect their crops and the villagers' crops and how to eat with them and so on. Those are all things that we already knew. But so in some occasion, it was by a person that knew less than we did. But anyway, the point was we had to go through the process, and I was quite happy to do that. And then I found out after the last visit from Neil Creel, Harry Springer rocked up at DRR and offered, and he said, "Your promotion for WO2 has come through." I didn't even know that. He did. And he said, "I've come to offer you the appointment of CSM 1 Commando." So, of course, in 1975, I leapt at it because, I mean, that to me was one of the biggest honors one could bestow on somebody, because 1 Commando was my home. And now I was going home as the boss, which was, I can't describe to you the emotion and the feeling that I got from that. And I was most grateful for the appointment.